I'd like to talk about the problem of genre, what I call the problem of genre. As an educator, there's only two things I can do really in my teaching. Number one, I can give you information that you didn't have, and hopefully that will allow you to formulate some new opinions and change the way you perceive the world. But more importantly, the second thing I can do is to change your sensitivity to issues. And in my discussion of genre, what I would like to begin by saying is that it is a very uncomfortable word to be using. There are so many problems with it, and my intention here is to make you as uncomfortable as I am with using the word. That doesn't mean to say that we can't use it. It just means that we have to be extra cautious in how we're using it. So I want to begin with the standard definition of genre. And those are basically the four major ones: prose, poetry, fiction, and drama. And this is conventionally what is understood as genre. So prose it's certainly capable of displaying imagery and symbolism and even metrical phenomena, but it's generally characterized by a absence of meter and cadence and rhyme. And poetry, by definition, at least before the 20th century, is most characteristically defined as meter and rhyme together. By the time we get poetry into the 20th century, most of that metric regularity disappears in favor of other things, but still considered poetry. Fiction is narrative done in prose, and fiction is in fact written in prose. So you could say, I suppose, that fiction is a subset of prose. And then we have drama, which is theatrical, the scripts for theatrical productions. Now things start to get a little messy, even with these four main categories, because there are newly emerging categories. For example, prose nonfiction, which contains narrative and storylines, but is not properly prose, which is a discussion of a particular topic, but shares some properties with fiction and drama. I'm thinking here of travelogues or personal narratives that are somewhat autobiographical and contain mostly realistic accounts of events, but could be embellished with fictitious facts or incidents. There is also digital writing. Oops, dig a digital. One day when I learn to type, I will be a dangerous man. These are, web-based genres of writing that are in part determined by the medium in which they are. Spelling gets altered and relaxed. You can use emojis, that kind of thing. I'm still going to background these two for the sake of argument because they are not really part of this main discussion here. It really is these big four that we're talking about. So that's the first thing. The second reason why all of these genres get mixed up is because if you think about drama, particularly something like Shakespeare's drama, drama has elements of fiction in it, in the sense that it is a prose narrative. It has characters, there's a plot, there's conflict, there's a rising and falling action, there's dialogue. It basically kind of looks like drama. You could say that, or fiction, you could say that, I suppose, drama is fiction acted out. But in Shakespeare's drama, you can also have poetry. For example, when Romeo and Juliet meet each other for the first time, they speak to each other in sonnets. And you can have prose inside of drama as well. You can also have in poetry something called a dramatic monologue, where a silent listener is basically being introduced to a narrator, a persona, who is talking about things and giving away characteristics of him or herself while talking about a particular topic. Browning's My Last Duchess, for example, is an example of that. So these four major forms of genre begin to bleed into each other and fold into one into the other, so that they are not really as clearly separate as we might like to think. However, inside each of these four main genres, there are other subgenres that are often referred to as genre, when in fact they should be technically called subgenre. So we'll take a look, for example, we'll take a look at the prose section right here. So here are some subgenres of prose. The essay, for example, is a particular style of writing, and the whole point about genre, actually let me back up here because I want to say something about genre. Genre really is a combination of two things. Number one, sorry, can't spell predictable. Predictable forms and content, along with innovations. So let me explain what I'm on about here. Make this smaller. Let's take movies, for example, romantic movies. There are so many of them out there, and they are governed in large part by a formula or formulae. So what do I mean by that? Well, a typical romantic movie comedy would be boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl, or vice versa. A boy and girl are said to be happy until some fundamental misunderstanding intervenes in their relationship. They are threatened. The relationship is threatened. They fall apart. One of them has an epiphany while the other one is about to leave town at the airport. There's always a frantic scramble in a car or on foot or by bike to rush to the airport or the train station to intercept their lover before they leave their life forever, and things end happily ever after. That is a predictable form or formula or content that we expect, especially in genre for sure, but especially in subgenres like romantic movies. However, if every author followed the content exactly, it would be the same story over and over again. What in fact every author tries to do is to color inside the lines, to follow the formula of the genre or the subgenre, but also to make innovations so that while the genre or subgenre is recognizable as a particular kind of genre or subgenre, it also is fundamentally different. So in those romantic comedies I talk about, it could be boy meets boy or girl meets girl. It could end with a rush to the airport and missing that person or having them killed off in some way, and so the story doesn't end the way we expect. So there is always, in every case, there is always a tension between the expectations of the genre and the innovations to the genre that the author is bringing consciously into that writing. And so can happen not only in terms of content but in form. I don't know if you know the movie Blazing Saddles, but that's a movie that actually messes with our sense of the diegetic, what is heard by the characters in the story and what is heard by us, the audience. And so you see two men riding across the desert and you hear a soundtrack of a full orchestra or band playing. And then as the camera moves to the side, you see that it isn't part of the soundtrack, but it's actually Count Basie's band playing in the middle of the desert. And so it toys with our ideas of what is expected in terms of form. Sometimes, for example, plays or movies will run 3 and 4 hours, or they will change. The hero will be the anti-hero. These are all kinds of shifts and variations that create a tension between what is predictable and what is new. So, with that in mind, here are some subgenres of prose. For example, the most prevalent one is the essay. Francis Bacon, who was writing in the early 1600s, developed the form. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, he wrote a collection of essays that have been assembled in an anthology called The Essays of Francis Bacon. They are very short. They are intended to reflect his contemplation on life and on various topics: children, marriage, fortune, work, death, disease, those kinds of things. The essay breaks down into subgenres, I suppose. Expository, which is to account for historical events or to lay bare reasons and facts for a particular event occurring. Persuasive is self-explanatory, I think, where you try to persuade somebody to change their mind about something or to believe one thing over another. Descriptive, basically characterized by adjectives and nouns, or adverbs, I mean, merely intended to paint a picture. Prose narrative is an interesting subgenre. There's a contemporary of Shakespeare called Nash, Thomas Nash, I believe, writes a book called The Unfortunate Traveler. And in that text, there really isn't a plot. It doesn't look like a novel or a piece of fiction in any sense that we would know it, because there are no chapters and there are no divisions like that. That's a formal characteristic of fiction. It just is a rambling series of events, call them episodic events, one event after another, just sort of chained together, strung together with no apparent purpose. And so the story doesn't move anywhere. There's no rising and falling action. There's just an endless stream of occurrences. That is in prose. It's a kind of narrative, but it's not fiction. So we kind of flop it over into the prose side of it. Biography and autobiography are two very important subgenres of prose. Autobiography, by the way, doesn't really make its way into the English language until Edward Lord Herbert of Cherbury in the early 1600s, who writes the first autobiography in English. It did exist in Italy a little bit earlier. A goldsmith by the name of Cellini wrote his autobiography 100 years before autobiographies were happening in England. The reason autobiographies did not exist for a long time is because nobody thought that their own lives would be important enough as an individual expression of life to be documented in any way. But these are various forms of prose as well. Travelogues. Here's a link that will take you. You can just Google 10 types of blogs. You'll see that there's subgenres of blogging. Technical writing is another kind of prose. Press releases, including marketing and political announcements, advice columns in newspapers. These are just a few random sub-genres of prose. So just to review all of this material, we're going to basically use the term genre to talk about the four major genres: prose, poetry, fiction, and drama. That's essentially what I mean. Under these four different genres here, I tried to make the point that they blend into each other and that sometimes drama includes poetry and prose, and fiction can include drama, and they kind of fold into each other. And secondly, I want to make the point that what technically are subgenres of prose, some people actually refer to as genre, but they don't mean that because the genre is usually reserved for a larger term. So you may see different critics and different instructors using the word genre in slightly different contexts. It's fine, don't worry about it. You, the reader, need to be big enough to translate what particular usage that writer intends when they talk about genre, and you should be fine.